Welcome to the Next Chapter podcast. If you are a professional or an entrepreneur that's ready to dive headfirst into your next chapter of business success and create a kick-ass freaking life, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Rob Murgatroyd, and I'll be bringing you some game-changing insights, great interviews, and real-life transformations of people who have made a leap into their next chapter. Strap in and let's get this party started. What's up, everybody, and welcome to this solo episode of The Next Chapter. All right, so I want to redefine success with you. I'm going to invite you into a re-questioning of what success is, and I'll do it through a little bit of maybe a story or a background of how I arrived at this re-questioning of my next chapter. When I was in LA, I was in LA for a few months, not a really long time. And it was really interesting. You know, if you've never lived in LA, you know, like just think Rodeo Drive, like it's literally like that with the Ferraris and the whole thing. It's everywhere. And I got really caught up in just not feeling like I was enough. You know, I spent a big chunk of my time focusing on making more money. I would overschedule myself. I always felt like, you know, I didn't have enough money to have the right house, to have the right car. And I just always felt like I was coming up short in that area. And, you know, if I'm honest, my ego was really driving that train. I don't think I understood it at that time. I felt like I was just really just trying to work hard for the family, but it was really more ego. And one day, you know, it's one of these days where I'm packed from the second I open my eyes. My schedule is just, you know, every minute I left no time for anything. It was just Zoom after Zoom, coaching call after coaching call, business meeting after business meeting. And, you know, in between, you know, the 30 seconds I had to connect from one Zoom to the next Zoom, I walked out into the kitchen. My office was right next to the kitchen. And my wife was there, and she's like giving me this look, and you know your spouse, and you know when they're not happy with you. And she was just not loving where I was in my life. And she looks at me and she's like, you know, I like you better in Italy. And we had spent 3 months in Florence. And I was like, what is that supposed to mean? And she's like, you know, when you were in Florence, you were a different guy. And I'm like, in what way? And she's like, you weren't about this ego. You know, I'm like, I don't understand what you mean. Like, what am I doing? I'm trying to work. What am I doing now that's so egotistical? And she's like, well, when you were in Florence, you would, you know, we had a baby at the time, Sophia, she was in a stroller, and she's like, you would walk her up in the dead of August, which is when we were there, and you'd carry her up 6 flights of stairs. There was no elevator in the building. You never complained about there not being an elevator. You brought her up and you came upstairs and you were happy and you were laughing. And you come back here, you know, all you wanted to do was move to California. And now you're here living in California, but the house isn't good enough. And now it's got to be next to the beach, and the car you're driving is not good enough. And you want to get the new Ferrari. It's all ego. It was the first time where the lights came on, and I slowly started to realize I am not aligned with what's important to me. There was a disconnect from my true nature. My true nature is I really have a heart for the art and experiences of life, and I just was not listening to what that voice was telling me. I was following everybody else's blueprint of what other people were doing. And I'm just grinding away trying to play bigger. You know, everybody's telling you, play bigger, you got to play bigger. And then I started to realize that playing bigger is really code for make more money. Nobody was telling me play bigger in your life, play bigger in your relationships, play bigger in your spirituality, you know, play bigger in where you want to live, and play bigger in what your vision is. They were like, play bigger was really code for make more money. And I started to realize that I was caging myself in under this cover of playing bigger. And, if you ask an entrepreneur about when is enough, they're going to tell you it's never enough. You start out with the Jeep and you got to upgrade it to the Porsche, and then the Porsche becomes a Range Rover, and then when that is over, then it becomes a Bentley, and then it becomes a Rolls, and we become addicted to this perpetual upgrade of the next thing. And in an effort to obtain this freedom, I realized that I was just really trapping myself in, and so I started to re-question things, and I started to say, okay, so when is enough? And I thought, I know enough is enough when I erode the bandwidth that I set for a great life. And I started to say, okay, well, what is a great life? And I wrote down a vision of what I wanted my life to look like. Not, I want houses in Saint-Tropez and, the vision that, I call it the Elton John vision. I want a house in Saint-Tropez, and I want one in the south of Spain, and I want a Greek, villa, and I want a jet, and I want a mansion. Not that one, but like a great life that you want now. Not the 20 seasons of your life between now and that ultimate vision, but the one that you want next. And so I wrote that down, and I was like, okay, is it in my voice? Is this something that I really want, or am I doing this because everybody else is taking pictures of themselves on a private jet for Instagram? And when I realized it was what I wanted, and that ultimately wound up being a vision for living in Florence, Italy, coming back to Italy to live. And then I calculated, well, how much does that vision actually cost me? And then that became my dream life budget. And so I said, okay, so instead of having this flex of look at me on the jet, look at me in the 911, look at me in the McMansion, I was like, well, what is my flex now? And my flex now was being able to take a nap whenever the hell I wanted to take a nap. My flex now was if you asked me to go for coffee, I didn't open my calendar and say, I'm going to do it in 2 months or 6 weeks. I'm going to do it today. My flex now, what I'm thinking through this as I'm going through this in my mind. My flex now is taking the summers off. I want to take the summer off. I love being in the Mediterranean in the summer, and I don't want to deal with working. So that's a flex for me. I want evenings with my family. You get the idea. It was like, what are these things? Because I didn't want the freaking Porsche. I was just trying to keep up with everybody else. And then I started to realize, particularly living here, as I moved into this next chapter, that there were other things like community. I doubled down on community. It's worth it. It's worth it for you to do a Google search on this guy, Robert Waldinger, who's done the longest survey on what happiness takes to have. In other words, if people who self-report happiness, where does that come from? And the answer is always it came from some level of being in a community. And I looked at things like the blue zones where people were living the longest in the world. And I realized that once again, it was community. Yes, it was diet and spirituality, but it was community to a large extent. And if you would have asked me, did I have community in LA or before that in Atlanta, I would have said, yeah, I have friends, but I've never had a community like I have here where people are actively involved in my life at this level. And I just realized that I wanted to do other things. Like I wanted to have different conversations with people. I was tired of asking people. Every time I went out to dinner with somebody, I was like, well, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? It's a very American thing to do. And I realized that I don't really give a shit what they do. I want to know who they are. I want to know what they think about. I want to know what they're interested in. I want to have a conversation. And through all of this re-questioning, I started to realize that the irony is that people are looking at me, and I can tell from the messages that I get from people, they're like, oh, you must have moved to Florence with millions and millions of dollars. And it's not true. I didn't. I'm living like a millionaire now because I'm living in a way that is aligned with what I want, and I can do it for a couple of $100,000 a year. I mean, we'll do another podcast on how I calculated the Dream Life budget. But if you're in a place where you're looking to create a next chapter, I invite you to re-question the flex, re-question your vision, re-question what's important to you. And I think that's it. Let me know what you think about this episode. Look, I've been there, craving something different as a professional. Maybe you want to level up your business. Maybe you love what you do, but you need some time freedom. Or maybe you're ready to say goodbye to it all and dive into a totally new world of business. Either way, I've got you covered. My coaching programs will help you reverse engineer a plan that will help you take the next step in creating the success and life you've always dreamed of. In the show notes, you'll see a link for a one-on-one coaching as well as group coaching. Just hit up one of those links in the show notes and we'll jump on a free discovery call.